My guest today is Rippin Sindher, an award-winning filmmaker and producer with industry experience spanning the Directors Guild of America and major network television. She is a two-time recipient of the Bank of America Big Tell Film Award, which backed her anti-hate documentary, SEVA, earning special congressional recognition. Now, on the narrative front, Rippin wrote, directed, and produced Broken Drawer and The Hideout. Both won multiple festival awards and landed her a feature film writing assignment to adapt The Village Bride of Beverly Hills. This led to Rippin being selected as a directing fellow and production consultant on S.W.A.T, and previously joining a directing intensive for Criminal Minds and being the first directing fellow on Ryan Murphy's Ratched for Netflix. Now, she won the Julia S. Gao Short Film Challenge with Cape and Janet Yang Productions for her Oscar qualifying short, Flight 182, executive produced by Emmy winner Archie Panjabi, which is our discussion today. So, ladies and gentlemen, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome award-winning film director Rippin Sindher and her compelling Oscar qualifying short film, Flight 182, to the show. Welcome, Rippin.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a joy to be here.
Well, I was literally on the edge of my seat with this short film, and I understand that it's based on a true story. So tell us about Flight 182.
Yeah, so Flight 182 is a flight before 9/11, one of the biggest acts of aviation terrorism in the world that a lot of people really haven't heard about because it went off the radar completely. So on June 23rd, 1985, there was a flight that was going from Canada and it was en route to Delhi and it was meant to stop off in London. It never made it there. It went off of the Irish coast in a mid-air explosion that ended in the Atlantic Ocean. And so there were 329 lives that were on that flight, and my relative included. So it was a story that we really knew. But what happened after the flight really is there were a lot of polarized issues. There wasn't a lot of accountability from the government. It was done on international water. And so who was going to take accountability really ended up being the reason why we didn't really see it. It didn't get the media attention, and families didn't really get the protection that was needed. And so, fast forward, what ended up happening is this ended up being the longest standing trial in Canadian history. And only one person was ever convicted and then let go. And, we're going to dive into this, but it's a story that I've lived with for a long time and finally found the courage to say, hey, I'm going to do it and I'm going to make this happen.
Back during that time in 1985, um, America wasn't really overly familiar with terrorism,
Right.
and but and I understand why this particular incidents didn't really, I guess, really hit the international news cycles. Of course, there wasn't really a news cycle back in 1985, so it was
Right.
always the 6 o'clock news. But it was really a very small terrorist group from India, correct?
Yeah, so it was a separatist group. I think knowing what was happening in the world at that time, and there was a lot of international conflict that was happening. So there was a separatist group that was organizing in Canada and parts of Europe and really around the world. And what they wanted to do was use this as a calling to the Indian government because of what had happened in 1984 and had continued to happen in 1985 politically.
Wow. And I understand it, as you mentioned, your uncle was on Flight 182. So tell me a bit about your uncle, Daljit Gruel, who was on the flight.
Yeah, so Uncle Daljit Gurwal, this is really a family story. And when I spoke with his daughter, Prab, it was really in the heart of the pandemic. And we were both talking about our own individual losses in life. And so this has really become a healing process to use cinema in so many different ways to expose a story I care about. But we started talking, and I said, I always have this fascination with who was that person. I think so much of tragedy happens in the world, and I don't think that we often get the time to humanize people. And So I started going through the specifics, and it was like learning about Uncle Doljit from the very beginning because I wasn't born until years after this tragedy had occurred. But when sitting with Prab, his daughter, and being able to, she gave me all of these personal materials over the years that we had and books, and I wanted to know everything of like what was his favorite drink and what kind of father, and really allowing my family to dig into things that I think when you face trauma in a lot of ways you want to close off. But in ways I was able to see what are the joyful moments about these human beings and this family. And so you will notice in the film there's these sort of lighthearted moments between husband and wife, and those are all taken from real sentiments and real anecdotes. I mean, Prab and I really worked through the story because I felt a responsibility to this that I haven't ever in a lot of my other work. It's almost like all of these things had to feel real.
So she was so she was the daughter. So what, your
Hmm.
cousin?
Yep.
You know, that's the thing I noticed when I was watching the film prior towards the ending of the film. And I kept sitting there when I was watching it, I was like, the characters are so true to life because I knew the story was based on a true story. And I was wondering how you were able to form your uncle's his attitude, the way he interacted with your aunt and your cousin, and then putting your aunt's story together as well because she plays really the heaviest part of this whole film. It's like she's carrying this hidden fear, and we all feel it when we watch the film, and it doesn't
Yeah.
let you go. And how are you able to shape her character?
Yeah, I mean, there was just so much research has been done, and I also wanted to tap into universal aspects of all different families and the immigrant narrative. I leaned into my own father's experience, my own aunt's experience, my own like the female experiences of the time, and also really wanted to understand the nuances because understanding what that journey is, what that generation had to go through and what they experienced. Like we live in a very tech forward, life is so different now, as you and I were talking about. But what is the simplicity of that world? And growing up in the South Asian community and being from the Sikh faith, these are things that are really important to me. Like the so it was so much observation, and it's very layered because first it starts with what are the essences of the truth. What am I willing to creatively, because this is an adaptation in a narrative space, what creative liberties can I take, how do I want to really inform the piece with them. And I kept coming back to this, and I really built the short out in a way where I thought, how can I really pull this film off as a period piece that's contained but universal in 2.5 days with under $25,000? And then I really felt that, as that fear that we all had when the news broke out about the pandemic, or anytime there's tragedy in the world, even more so now, like the world feels really unsafe. And so really understanding the family became the impetus. And to your point, if I could allow this family to feel real in all of the details, then it could transcend race and culture and boundaries. And it could feel real to you, it could feel real to me, and it could feel real to people of all generations.
Yeah, and you pulled it off perfectly. And I should say brilliantly because even though it is an immigrant story, it's still, we'll just say in this case, we could say it's a full-blown Canadian story. But when I was watching it, I kept thinking, because here is this very small, almost an unknown terrorist organization. And in the film, your aunt didn't want your uncle to fly that day because she knew that there was an uprising in Canada among those of Indian descent. And
Right.
I was sitting here thinking when I was watching the film, I'm like, okay, she's nervous. She's in fear. He's thinking about going to India to see his mother, who I guess is probably not going to live that much longer. And I kept thinking, I'm like, if she is that nervous, what are the normal Canadians thinking at this very same time? Are they just like blowing it off as another news item, not thinking too much about it because it's not really, they don't look at it as part of their heritage. It's just a part of the population in Canada, and only they worry about it. And because it's 1985, we don't
Yeah.
have the connections. Back then, we didn't have the connections to media and the outside world in an instant like we do now. So I can understand why she was so nervous and in fear of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that at the core and heart of this film is that contemplative decision as humans that we have. When duty calls for family, what do we do? Do we run the risk, even if we know that we're going to have to go into harm's way? So, really, it's like any part of history that's been so heightened. As a mother, as a father, as someone who's a loved one, you run the risk anytime you leave your house, especially nowadays. We look at how unsafe environments could be. And so I'm so glad that you picked up on the fears of the time because there were rallies that were happening from the separatist group. There were organizings that were happening in places of faith, and so it was kind of like surrounded, but you didn't know what could happen and when it could happen. And what's so interesting is like in 1984, there was the Indian government attacked the holiest Sikh shrine. And so that's just a little bit of framework of how this continued to bubble and fester. There were the Sikh riots that happened in India, and why around the world there was just so much animosity and wanting revenge of some sort. And so when we get to Canada, and a lot of these immigration patterns out of India have to do with that, wanting safety, wanting to be in another country, wanting to pursue a new life. And yet, the irony of that is um, they're insulated by a lot of this political conversation that's still happening. And just so, what I found fascinating in all of my research too is that the US knew. There's places in Europe that, the Canadian intelligence team, it's not that this was foreign to them. They just didn't know when it was going to happen. And they actually had thought that something was going to happen when Rajiv Gandhi visited the US just months prior to when this actually happened. And so when everything went okay with that visit, it was almost like, okay, well, we're cleared with that. Now the essential threat that still exists is maybe not as big of a threat. And I think that always really stuck with me because it's the knowing and the neglecting, or the knowing and not actively still making it a priority. And the something that is not discussed openly, which I'm okay to say, is that, there are race politics involved in a story like this. It's very much.
There is, and I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm probably going to get the year wrong, but when the Pan Am plane
Mhm.
was blown out of the sky over the UK, I think that was 1989. So it wasn't too much longer after Flight 182, but
Right.
you look at the differences on how the media reported on those two separate instances. So in 1985, I had never heard of Flight 182, but I knew
Right.
about the Pan Am bombing. And
Yeah, I mean, but you're talking about Lockerbie,
yeah,
like,
Lockerbie.
everyone knows about Lockerbie, everyone knows about 9/11. To your point, it's like these are considered the Air India bombings, plural, because what we didn't talk about is that there was a second flight, that went off, prematurely in Japan. And so the total death count was 331, but essentially those linked together, and is how the evidence was really revealed.
Yeah, and what after I watched your film a few times, I actually went online to look up Flight 182 to go in depth to understand how this all started. And of course, like you said, there's two suitcases, one in Canada, one in Japan, because they were wanting to basically have two separate bombings on the opposite ends of the planet and trying to make a statement. But like you said, the second one went off in the baggage um, part of the airport and killed two workers. When I was watching the scene when the suitcases were going through a security check, and of course, this is not the security check that we have now at the airport, it's actually behind the scenes. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that back in 1985, they were actually doing security checks on luggage.
Mm.
So how did
Yeah.
you, I mean, what kind of research did you have to do to look at that timeline and understand how things were done differently, let's say at the airports?
Yeah, I mean, this was a very heavy research project for me, and it required everything from speaking with airline personnel, baggage handlers who know how to handle specific bags, people who had worked in the 80s, people who were working in Canada at the time. I know we're talking about a short film, but I felt like if this is going to happen, I got to know the ins and outs, and I got to know why I'm compelled to film this security scene. And it kept coming back to like, it's unheard of to use. So the fact that the x-ray machine conveniently broke down and the head security officer tells the baggage handler to use these PDDX wands. They're like security wands that you used to use when you're going inside of a concert of some sort, you know? But to rely on such arbitrary decision making because you're trying to speed up the process and get it to go. I mean, I looked through all these testimonies from the actual handlers of the time. I was so engrossed in what happened, how did it break down, what was the orders that were given to them, because I just kept coming back to one suitcase, one bomb inside of a suitcase, and all of a sudden, this is like an entire 747 goes down. An entire part of history is changed. To me, that's fascinating. One thing, one plane, and it's like I just and it's human error to some extent, but how can we really understand what that was? And so it was so fascinating to me, and I just kept coming back to that image.
How did you how did you create the bomb? Was it based on intel or you figured, well, if it's a suitcase, make it the size of an old VCR?
No, it's really fascinating. Like my background is also in documentary and I love the research. So there were Samsonite suitcases. That's what we had, you know. There was a Sanyo tuner. That is what we had.
Mm.
And there was some creative liberty on the cutout of the center part of it, but it was important to me that there were four dynamite sticks that were put into it. And so like when I came to the team and the production designers, I really had a clear idea to be able to present them, these are the running facts from what was disclosed in the trial. This is what was disclosed by testimony. And now, given the resources and the constraints of production that we may have, this is kind of the anchor image of what I would love, but how do we work together? And how do you bring your expertise and creativity to making it the best version we can?
Yeah, you know, when I watched this film, there was two things that popped in my head. One, my uncle was a baggage handler for years for Delta, and my grandfather
Wow.
sold Samsonite to some of the most famous athletes back in the day. And so I recognized a lot of that from 1985 because you created this film, and this is rare, and I say it's rare because with short films, this is one of the films that you feel like you just watched a feature
Mm,
because it's so intense and uh, the acting is just absolutely stellar in
yeah.
this. But we're gonna dive in a bit into the actual film itself. But was your uncle's body ever recovered from the crash site?
So it was not. No. And just so, in case you're interested, like only 131 bodies were recovered, and his watch was found, and um, so that was always really important to me. And there was a Cabbage Patch doll that was found in the water, and so some of these piercing images that came from the research really informed the creative process.
I was going to ask about the Cabbage Patch doll because I know that it's in the film, um, and then you actually show the actual footage within the credits. So I didn't know if you were basically paying homage to maybe the child that was lost, but I also like the fact that you had your cousin actually gave the Cabbage Patch to your uncle and he took it with him on his trip.
Yeah, yeah. And so, when I was doing all of this research, my family had also been given a book of remembrance, and so Prab had given that to me. And in it, it's not just these eulogies, but there's every single, whether it's a kid or an adult that was on that plane, it had these sentiments and these artwork, there's poetry, these nuances. And so, as much as this is about one particular family, I felt a sense of responsibility to research what I could find and pour that into this film in the like very small, subtle details. And that Cabbage Patch doll was recovered from the water, and it's one of those moments, it's so visceral that you're just kind of like, whoa, this is so real, you know?
That's what I was thinking. It made the impact that much stronger. Because when we see, I don't want to say this film is not. I'm not going to call it a reenactment. It's based on a true story, but when you're able to bring in real footage into the credits, it really it really brings it home that this situation was real. A lot of like you said, if you don't count the two in Japan, but 329 were killed and 200 bodies were not recovered. And then that Cabbage Patch doll in the credits, you sit there. I mean, I was sitting here going, "Oh, oh no." And to think how many years ago that was. That's what, 40 years ago now.
Yeah, this
And
year.
and society hasn't changed.
No, no. In fact, there was just, this June, another Air India aircraft that went down.
Was that the one that took off and then crashed?
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Boy, is that a whole nother story. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
when I went in and did some back end research on Flight 182, what really angered me was that I don't understand why the terrorist who built the bombs only received a 15-year sentence. He got out of prison in 2017. Why was he not given life?
I mean, there are so many questions and so many unresolved details about this case. And it really is, in my opinion, an intersection of politics, power, and the dynamics that are in play in a country like that. And it I just ended up, going to this conference that was held for all of these families, all of our families, during the 40th anniversary. And it just feels like there was really no accountability. And it's really devastating to see the amount of advocacy and self-generated cause that families have come together in the grassroots, and yet have really been overshadowed. And I can't speak to the details of what the government is, but I just know that um, there's a lot of political agendas that are in play with a lot of different groups, And there is fear one way or the other from within the government of how do you shift those power dynamics, and not wanting to perpetuate it further, but in not wanting to perpetuate something and not addressing it, you're actually causing it to reoccur in a lot of ways, you know? And so that's why I made this film. This film to me is really a symbol of not only memory justice, but if like we don't speak about it, and we we have to, like, we are part of a country, and we have the right to be protected, you know, like that is a human right. That's what human rights are about. And it is on some level very frustrating to go to a country like Canada and not see a museum about this, not to see it in textbooks. You know, it's not only erased, but it's almost like it didn't even happen. And I think it's the first time ever there is a digital archive that's been launched. But those are the thoughts I have.
You know, this also brings up another element. When you look at what happened with Flight 182, and it was Canadian based. If it was American based, America would have went and found a way to figure out who they're going to bomb in retaliation. But Canada's not that type of country, is it?
Mm, right.
And they almost come across as passive,
Yeah. I mean, I think that would be fair.
you know. And I don't mean that as a negative, you know, because in life you got to pick your battles. And
Right.
sometimes, you know, some of the countries have a tendency to start a battle that they have no business starting. And when I was looking, because I was juggling the time period, because things were so different on the technology side in 1985. But when I was comparing it to today's society, not that much has changed.
Right.
That was the sad part, because
Hmm.
nothing worse than hearing about a, an airliner full of people. It disappears off radar. And if it's a terrorist situation, we know now someone's going to get in trouble.
Right.
Retaliation's coming. Trials, we rarely ever see that even happen anymore when it comes to things like this. And to see that Flight 182 actually had a trial, that actually blew my mind.
Yeah. 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 And you're absolutely right. You know, when it's like, yes, we are 40 years from that, but at the same time, so relevant. Flight incidences, this idea of revenge, this idea of otherism, political violence, what is safe, what is not. These are like themes that are rooted in the everyday. What was even more fascinating? Not only was this the trial, in 2010, officially, there was a public acknowledgement from the prime minister saying, we apologize to the families. Yes, the evidence was mishandled. Like there was detailed accounts of issuing the families an apology, you know, after all of these years. But one could argue, like, is that the best we can do? Is that the best way of serving justice? Because the pain is still there, the closure really isn't there. Um, and yeah, it just really raises like what is the relationship between human beings in a country and governing powers?
Well, it also um, shines a light on how a country as like Canada, we'll just use Canada as an example because this is where it originated from, how even Canada treats a part of the population, an immigrant population within their own country.
Yeah,
Because if this was a plane full of 100% Canadians, it was on Air Canada, I'm sure the whole situation in 1985 would have been completely different.
I think you're right.
And because this was Air India, what did India actually do about it?
Well, and that's those are, what's fascinating is no one wanted to hold themselves accountable, because if one government did and it was coined a terrorist attack on in the moment, then they would owe reparations to families right away. If it was a aircraft failure from a government that, housed that aircraft, then it was a failure on their end. So it just it's so unfortunate in so many ways that this was sort of the not having accountability. Is this is a case that you really see what happens when people don't take accountability and don't want to tell the truth for their own individual reasons, because it's a benefit to them and to the respective countries. And
Yeah,
what's wild, which I don't know if this is fully the case, but like being on the journey with this film in the festival circuit is I've had people who've worked in high level intelligence in other countries say, oh, well, we know this case. This is a case that is studied. This is a case that we actually learned about what the failings were and what was not taken care of. And we've studied this, and I can't get into all the details of that, but it's been an eye opening experience for me.
I bet it has. And like I said, this short film feels like a feature film, but I want to get into the creation of the actual film, the filming of this story. Where in the world did you find the location of an interior of a home that was reminiscent of the 1980s decor?
This was a full labor of love, and I geek out about this because um, it was like the most interesting production dilemma, right? Where it was like, okay, if we want to make this look right, there's no way we can film this in LA because we'll break the entire budget. So my immediate thought was, I love taking my projects back into my hometown of Selma, California, small, quaint raisin farm town, full of love and community. And they're always like, Rippin, what do you need? Let's band together and make it happen. And I truly say that. So I had my because budget's always so scarce. I had my dad who's like in real estate in this space, and I was like, Dad, I'm looking for this particular house with wooden cabinets. It's got to happen. So we're driving around literally place to place to place, and we come across a family friend, and we go into their house, and they had the outside is what we see in the film. It's the green house, but they had just renovated all of the inside. So I was just about to fall, and I'm like, oh my God, how could this happen? And it just like so much of this film is divine energy. Like their daughter happened to be in town and was in the kitchen that day. And she's like, well, we have a trailer home on this property. Do you want to come check it out? So I literally go into the what's been completely inside of this house. And so I open the door and I'm like a kid in a candy store, and I'm just like, "Oh my God, it's perfect." And there's this shot that I want where the mom's in the kitchen and the dad's like in the living room, and I'm just going bananas, and she's like, "What is happening?" But I will say, like, if the family's name is the Nidger family, and if they hadn't given me that trailer and just really said, you're like a daughter to us. Go make this whatever you want. Literally from um and so I wallpapered that entire place with the support of some family, friends, and community members. I also tiled the floor with support of family members and community. It's because there wasn't money. There wasn't money. And I think I really wanted to use that money to pay as equitably as possible and use it for other demands in production. And so to me, there's just always a very loving and familial experience of bringing a film into the hometown and like being able to share that experience. So yeah, so it was completely a labor of love, and you should know
And
that.
I was so impressed with the interior. And but what plays with that interior is your choice of color palette to bring the feeling of the 1980s. And I noticed that the color palette changes from the home to the airplane. Explain.
Yes. Oh, I love color palette shifts. Even the way that visual language was informed around that. An interesting fact is even though we did 2 days in the trailer home, there was no place in Selma, California that was going to play for the airport. And it was, so we had to do a half day in Los Angeles and dress the set. And just a few days before we were, actually 2 days before we were going to shoot, a big company came in and said, well, we want to take all of these seats and we're paying like 4 times the price. So I was in a huge pickle to reassess and make it all work. Um, and and so just kind of some of the color palette really informed everything. I knew I wanted those scenes to feel suspenseful and cooler and very mysterious because it's a sharp contrast from the stability of the house, which is warm, very 80s. There were so many specific choices, like the weather was its own character. I studied all the clouds. I'm probably a meteorologist in another life at this point. But it was like so important to me that all of these things are thought through. And so you'll actually notice even the lighting changes inside of the house as the mood is changing, as the shifts are happening, as we're getting to the table scene in scene 11, there's actually a thunderstorm brewing. And then we transition into some of the airport work. But yeah, I'm very specific. I I really also wanted to shoot that a very specific way where you're, it's very handheld, it's very swingy, it's very movie in the airport sequences. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, because something I don't see in very many short films is the number of locations. Because a lot of them are shot in one location based on budget or based on the story, because it's a short film. But in yours, I counted four. So how many days did it take you to film the short?
I did it in 2.5 days.
The whole film?
Absolutely. Yes, it's crazy. I would not recommend that. But at the same time, I do think I'm a person that can pull that off, knowing like I would never compromise production. But so much of this was, I'm telling you, I prepared and planned and thought through everything methodically.
Yeah, to pull this film, ladies and gentlemen, I would give her an Oscar just for what she pulled off in 2.5 days. Because I'm stu- I'm stunned because I can visualize the whole film in my head. I know this film from beginning to end, and I'm like, 2.5 days? How in the world did you pull that off? And so with the airport scene, because so there's the baggage handling scene, which you did because I could tell with the handhelds, which you have to have that. You got to have that feel like, okay, security's down, we got to use these wands, and he's trying
Yeah.
to explain to them the sound to listen to, and it's chaos. But then how did you film the inside of the airplane?
So at the same location, they have an airport, they have an airplane set. And so we shot both of those parts on the same half day. And it was like, it was moving. When I'm telling you, we were moving and shaking. And it's so interesting. I love to be super transparent about the
Mhm.
indie process too. Like to even just get some of those belts that, would go on to like the suitcases would go on, that would break your budget. They are ridiculously expensive. So I work with my awesome production designer, Daniel, and he was like, Rippin, just trust me. We're going to make this work. We're going to create this contraption and Blake and I are going to be underneath that table. We're just going to like pull the we're going to pull the bell and it's going to work, okay? And then that's where you're just like, I totally trust you. It's going to happen. So we got through that scene and we literally moved to the next scene. So they were already working ahead of it, like they dressed it. Um, to me, it's like, okay, everything comes down to story. All of the other stuff is very beautiful and I love it, but I trust the people I put into place as well to say, look, what is the most essential parts we need? And Daniel was like, great, let's, make sure we get the red coverings for the seats. and let's make sure we add the decals on certain parts of the window. But I think outside from that, we're going to be in a good place. And again, when I'm talking about such a love of labor and special film, it was also so important to me that I work with the casting director and get the most authentic look and vibe for who the passengers were. And many of them, I had, I go to temple on Sundays, and I just sometimes you just really got to do it in the grassroots. And I had like a sign up table, and I like made an announcement in Punjabi, and I was like, I'm making this film. I would love for people to be involved, and like people signed up. And then it was literally calling them and making sure that they knew where to go. I spoke in Punjabi. It's one of my favorite moments being on a set where I'm literally getting everything in order, have this beautiful multicultural team, and then I also am speaking in the mother tongue to let everyone know, like, we're under pressure, let's sit down. And my first AD speaking Punjabi, and we're just like, let's make this happen. And to see people smile and like just feel that they are a part of something is so gratifying.
I love the planning process. And and to hear how you put this whole thing together. I have seen films that are not this complex, that they'll tell me, "Oh, we filmed it in 5 days." And sometimes I'm thinking, "Why?" Because, and then there are films that I watch and I'm like, "I bet they shot this whole thing in 1 day." And then they do, which there are films that you can justify filming a short in 1 day. Yours blows my mind. 2.5 days. This film is so complex. And ladies and gentlemen, you have to understand, whenever you get the chance to see this film, you will be on the edge of your seat. It's very, you get this, the tenseness comes from your aunt. So how do you come to cast your uncle, your aunt, and your cousin in this film?
Yeah.
Those that portray your family.
Yeah. It was like such a beautiful and organic experience. I had known of Sandeep Morrison, who plays the mother in this film, and had Sandeep read for the part a year and a half before I ever got the money. So just to give perspective, I was like, I have this idea, I really want to do it. I just don't know how it's going to align. And then when I actually won the grant, and as you know, sometimes the more chefs get in the kitchen and there's more decision making of how do we get certain talent and what and how. And um, I still kept coming back to Sandeep's performance, and I felt like they had a essence about them. Is Canadian, speaks the mother tongue fluently, and was the character really that I had created. And so once I had that piece, and then that is my brother, Gurinder Sindher, that's the father. I did have him read for the part. It wasn't just something that I was like, here's this part, do it. It was like, it's such an important part. It's got to be full on. And so I had read a few other people as well, but my brother is exceptional. And I don't say that because he's my sibling, I promise. And so once we had those pieces, I just really did a lot of chemistry reads. And sometimes you just switch people out and you're like, okay, does this work? But there was something about the trust that I had in both of them and their ability to bring this relationship to life that I just knew in my heart, this is right. And then Nasa Shokeen, who plays the daughter, I had looked at quite a few other little girls, and she had previously been in a spot that Gurinder had been in before. So he had actually said, I would love for you to take a look at this young girl. And I just fell in love with her. And I fell in love with this idea of, I really built this family from scratch in the narrative sense, and gave them each, and really leaned into what their talents were. And I just did a lot of rehearsal and preparation and demystifying, because I've worked with kids before, and that is its own challenge sometimes, because you got to really let them know what's going on and how. But everyone was super professional, and I would set up sort of these family dates for them ahead of time, so they got to know each other. And so by the time it was time to film, they felt like one unit.
Well, well, it comes across on screen perfectly, and I thought the song was a nice touch. When the little girl
Yeah.
was singing.
Yeah, I mean, she's just a brilliant singer. In the audition process, she had expressed her own talents, I mean, she just is an incredible singer. And having really thought through what nuances I wanted to put in, this is a very classical song, and it's had different renditions, but it cuts so deep. You know, even the wording of that is super intentional of like, keeping your letting yourself swirl and keep continuing even though you're going to know that you're going to meet grief. And so I just love that song. And if you noticed in the end credits, I actually had it redone in an a cappella sense from a beautiful vocalist named Maya Batra. And I worked with the composer. It was the composer's idea, and who had said, "Look, Rippin, I love this song. What if we recreate it for the end credits?" And I was like, that's brilliant, Dhruv. Let's do it. And then I always love to find ways to empower people who've been part of my journey. So I called up Maya, who lives in Australia. Nothing's been easy about this project. So we actually had to do the recording remotely.
You know, well,
Yeah.
that happens a lot now. So, uh, but what I loved about the song in the film was it took the audience away from the mother's fear for a moment. So we're focusing on the girl. She's singing, she's smiling. The father's videotaping it. He can't wait to take it and show his mother. So there's this part of the film in which we get a bit of rest and our guard is taken down a bit, but then it comes right back. So what has been the audience's reaction to the film?
It's been very well received. I mean, I as a filmmaker, you go on this journey of making something that you believe in, and you're just hoping like it gets into the hands and it gets to be seen. And I tell you, like at this point, just audience members from so many different cultures, they resonate to so many different parts of this film. Someone has said, "Oh, the cooking part reminds me I'm Italian and I don't know anything about your culture or anything, but I feel so much about the mother's experience." You know, I've had young girls said it's unlocking something about their ancestors. And then like to your point that there's people that just feel so nostalgic. The home video was such a big part of what I wanted to contrast visually. That was my childhood. That was always my dad, in a way, always carrying his camcorder and wanting every single thing on tape. And I think that the feeling of love and loss is universal. And it's been such a profound experience to feel that cinema can do this, because I've set out to make something that is really an extension of who I am and pour my heart and soul into it. And so it's unbelievable that it's being seen.
You should be very, very proud for this brilliant film. And now that you're Oscar qualified, where and when did you become qualified?
So we became qualified in June. We did a theatrical run at the Roxy, and it's been nominated at several Oscar qualifying festivals. It's been a very special journey, and I just want to say to any independent artist out there as well, is like, sometimes you start a journey and there's always going to be, some folks that will doubt you or think that there has to be a certain echelon of the work. But then I think there's incredible people along the way that really see it and support it. I mean, I think this has been one of those stories with this film.
Yeah. Do you have any plans on taking Flight 182 as a full feature film?
That's funny you asked that. Yes, the feature script of this has been a finalist for one of the Sundance Labs. So it's been a nonstop experience for me of, taking the short out to on this festival run, but already having the feature in play. It's been pitched. It's in the process of being packaged. So everything's super intentional, and that the longer version of this will actually delve into the trial that we spoke briefly about, and really from the wife's perspective of taking on the justice system.
Well, I can't wait to see the full length feature because I was on the edge of my seat with the short film. It had a perfect arc. It was not a It was not a proof of concept, which I loved because when I see short films and I'm the first thought in my mind is proof of concept, I'm like, don't do that. You know,
Yeah.
pull as much of a story as you can, and you did it with such great brilliance. And ladies and gentlemen, Rippin Sindher's Oscar qualified short film Flight 182 is based on the true story of Air India Flight 182, the deadliest aviation attack in the world until 9/11. 329 people lost their lives when a suitcase bomb exploded in the luggage compartment of a 747 off the coast of Ireland in 1985. But Rippin Sindher brings just one story out of hundreds who died that day. And Flight 182 is compelling, it's tense, and no way for the audience to stop the unpreventable. The cinematography of Flight 182 is spot on. The home's 1980s decor, you couldn't get it any more perfect than what you see in this film. You add the perfect color palette, and the audience is taken back in time, almost giving you a little bit of a feeling wondering, is this film or is it not? But that's has to do with the cinematography and the color palette and the fact that this is a period piece from 1985. And we feel the concerns of Mandeep, played by actress Sandeep Morrison, who gives an absolute outstanding performance in this film. Again, Flight 182 is powerful, it's compelling, it's tense, and gives us a sense of worry, something not found in very many films today. And it's Oscar season, so keep your eye out for Flight 182. And I want to thank you, Rippin, for sharing your compelling film with me today.
Thank you, Ward. Thank you so much for this space and all that you're doing. It's such an honor to spend time and to talk to you.
Oh, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, whenever you get the opportunity to see Flight 182, take it from me. It's an absolute don't miss this film. And for those of you, ladies and gentlemen, you can catch all of the Bond on Cinema interviews at bondoncinema.com. Check out our Prime show, our YouTube channel, and you can listen to us on your way to work on Spotify, iTunes, Audible, and more. And remember, you're either going to see me at the movies or on the red carpet.